And according to recent Ipsos studies on inflation, it shows that customer expectations are changing. So the study showed that 65% of customers expect immediate improvements in customer experience when prices rise. So what that ends up meaning is that service becomes that much more important as now their customer expectations have increased, but all because of inflation.
Hi, Anna. Good to see you.
Good to see you, Sarah.
I'm excited to chat a little bit today. I guess we should probably start with a quick round of introductions. I'm happy to start. My name is Sarah Grothaus, and I lead our U.S. insurance space here at NPS Prism.
Great. And I'm Anna Kremens. I'm a senior director on the Prism team, and I run our financial services products for North America. Excited to be chatting about P&C today.
Great. So today we're going to be talking about two themes that we're seeing across the U.S. insurance space. First, we'll be focusing on what we're seeing in the property and casualty area, and then we'll transition over to what we're seeing in life insurance. Let's go ahead and get started. So I'm curious to hear from you, how is U.S. inflation affecting insurance customers, both in terms of the prices that they pay, but also kind of how it shapes their experience with their provider more broadly?
I think it's no surprise to anyone when we see that inflation is impacting premiums. We're seeing most providers have higher premiums, right, as they're trying to cover their increasing costs as well as protect profitability. And we've been tracking this pretty closely in Prism the past few quarters. And every quarter, we're seeing more and more customers state that their premiums have been increasing. And this past quarter, we saw that about 20% of customers had a premium increase of over 10%, right? So those are significant increases. And so why does that matter? One, of course, it's going to impact customers' likelihood to renew, right? They're going to be more likely to shop. They're going to be more likely to renew, look around for other providers. But there's also an impact in overall customer advocacy. We're seeing that when customers face a premium hike greater than 10%, NPS decreases by over 30 points, right? That's significant difference in likelihood to recommend and loyalty. And according to recent Ipsos studies on inflation, it shows that customer expectations are changing. So the study showed that 65% of customers expect immediate improvements in customer experience when prices rise. So what that ends up meaning is that service becomes that much more important as now their customer expectations have increased, but all because of inflation.
Wow, that's interesting. So it's really this twofold impact. Of course, higher prices, which we know is going to impact customers greatly, but also their overall perception of the experience, it sounds like, is shaped by this. So as they pay higher prices, their expectations change, and the experiences that providers are offering may be less likely to delight them or more likely to annoy them than previous periods. That's really
Absolutely.
interesting. So I guess the natural next question here is, what can insurance companies do about this? Does our data suggest any ways that providers can soften or try to counteract the negative impact of these premium increases to NPS?
So there are actually several things that stand out in our data. The first one is, don't let the premium increases be a surprise to the customer. Tell your customers that it's happening, tell them why, and if possible, provide them other options so that they could stay with this customer and maybe keep their premium the same, right? Maybe that means changing the coverage a bit or increasing the deductible. And a personal experience that really ties this point to me is, I had a pet insurance that I was going to cancel. And so I reached out because the premium was increasing. So I reached out to them. They came back to me and said, sorry, you want to cancel. Here are some other options for you that you can have so that your premium actually stays the same. And they gave me several options with some higher deductibles. And that actually led me to keep my insurance and not switch customers, right? So that was an impactful piece of communication that prevented the provider of losing me as a customer. And the other point is around your point you were mentioning around servicing, right? Servicing really matters. And now with increasing prices, the expectations are higher around these servicing. And so as we think about servicing and insurance, claims really comes to mind, right? Claims are really emotive. Those are experiences that customers really hold on to for a long time. And so our data suggests that positive claims experiences will have a significant impact on premium increases. And so just to throw out some numbers here to kind of quantify this, a strong claims experience, let's say a claims promoter, is 4 times more likely to renew than a claims detractor. And so in numbers, what we saw is that only about 20% of these claims detractors were likely to renew their policy after a premium increase, versus almost 90% of customers were likely to renew their policy after a premium increase if they had a good claims experience. So again, back to that point that really strong servicing saves some of the premium increases and shows the value of the policy.
Got it. That makes sense. If we are able to really deliver on that risk protection and the claims experience that they really feel like they're paying for, they may be more likely to feel like the price is worth it, even if that price is climbing a bit from what they're used to. Another thing that I thought was interesting in our data that really sort of underscores this point even further is that at renewal, we see that more claims promoters actually cite their claims experience as their most important reason for renewal. So that just really pulls the thread there that, of course, the claims experience is top of mind when they're thinking about whether or not to renew. So I think it's clear that they really need to nail the claims experience for their customers. In terms of what we're seeing in our data, what does a good claims experience look and feel like for customers?
That's a great question. And in our data, we see a lot of things that drive what a really strong claims experience looks like. Two things that really drive it is around clarity and transparency around communication, right? So clear communication around the status of the claim, offering support and guidance throughout the process, resolving the claims in a timely manner, or even setting the expectations of when they're going to receive responses are really important. The other piece that is just as valuable is in what channels are you doing this in, right? Customers may want to first reach out and speak to an agent, but as the claim process goes through, they might want to be able to just check it online and see what the process is, right, and where they sit. They might not want to have to wait on hold to get in touch with a call center or an agent. And so understanding really where those channel preferences are and being able to communicate to customers back in those channels in a way that is transparent and clear and setting the expectation of what's going to go on is really, really important.
Got it. So it sounds like clarity, transparency, channel of choice. Those are all really good rules of thumb to shape claims experiences around. I think the point you made around proactive communication really resonates. As a consumer myself, I know that I'm always curious about the status, whether that's an order or a claim. So being able to really track the status as folks wait seems like a really helpful and sort of tactical way to keep them informed and keep them engaged throughout the process. So that makes sense.
Agree. And just to add to that too, I think one of the things that many companies struggle with is there's this fear of over communication, right? Where there's so many emails that customers get across all the different things that they touch. And claims is one that over communication is okay. Over communicate, tell them when they're going to receive a reply, tell them when they expect a response, when they're going to get paid. All those things really matter. And so over communication is just right and during the claims process.
I love that. I think we really have a good sense of what makes a good claims experience and what helps providers stand out in that area. But obviously, not everyone is going to go through a claim in a year's time or even in several years' time. And we wouldn't wish for more people to have to go through a claim, of course. So, in terms of how else we can mitigate the impacts of premium increases in terms of NPS for those customers who aren't experiencing a claim, are there any other ways to get ahead of or mitigate, as I said, that effect? How else can providers really positively impact both NPS, but also renewal more broadly?
So to what I was alluding before, communication is key in these renewal conversations, right? That no customer wants it to be a surprise that their premium has increased. And so what can providers do proactively to do this, right? It's communicating with the customer beforehand, and having that conversation and that communication be helpful. And so what we see in our data is as customers report how helpful the information was, right? So any provider that has very helpful, right? It's kind of on a scale of 1 to 7, very helpful proactive communication, we see NPS to be much more resilient. And what I mean by that is 20 to 40 points higher than those with poor communication. And now, what does good communication actually look like? There's a couple of things that go into that. One is the timing of the communication. we see the sweet spot be around 1 to 2 weeks before renewal, right? Customers want enough time that they can digest information, maybe shop around and see if that's the best price. But they also don't want to be so early that they're unable to kind of make a decision 3 months ahead of time, right? So that sweet spot is around 1 to 2 weeks. And the other thing we see is around how is the communication presented, right? Is it customer friendly, or are you trying to still sort of hide that premium increase? So things like have the before and after price clearly labeled. If it's an email communication, can you have it in the email versus having the customer have to log in to find out their premium increase, right? And all these things together, we're seeing huge improvements in NPS. And those that have been able to keep these strong communications, even with premium increase, have been able to stabilize their NPS over this inflationary time, while others that have similar premium increases have seen declines in NPS because the communication wasn't as helpful during that process.
I think that's so key what you said about including detail as clearly and transparently as possible, not trying to obscure or make the customer jump around in order to get more detail on what's happening with their policy and their premium. We definitely saw that across our data and our customer verbatims, that they're really looking for explanation. They're looking for options, like you said, to feel like they have leverage and choice rather than just being hit with a bigger bill. And what this says to me is that we shouldn't underestimate customers' ability to process the details and want to be involved in really putting together a policy that works for them, and getting into the weeds a bit if it means that they end up with a policy that balances coverage and price in a way that is going to keep them happy in the long term.
Absolutely.
So I think we've covered a number of topics around how providers can really mitigate the impacts of premium increases, knowing that that's sort of an inevitable reality of the current market for pretty much every provider across the insurance landscape. Just to summarize, I think it's clear that claims experiences matter, and customers want to feel like their provider is being clear and communicating effectively and frequently around their claim support. They're also looking for providers to offer some true guidance to them during this process, which is highly emotive, as we see in our Prism data, and meet them where they are from a channel perspective. I think it's clear in what we're seeing in our Prism data that if the claims experience is a positive one, customers are going to be much less price sensitive when it comes to renewal time. It's also important to bear in mind what you just mentioned around communications, clear, timely communication about when, why, how their premiums will change and what options they have to manage that. Between those two things, I think providers have a bit of a roadmap on how to navigate this really challenging time in the P&C space. And we're excited to see what the data tells us for the rest of 2023. Great. So switching gears to life insurance. I think let's start broadly. What are some of the macro themes that we're seeing on the life insurance side so far this year?
Yeah, absolutely. I think life insurance is a really interesting one because unlike most products that you buy, you feel that value throughout that life of the product, right? In P&C insurance, eventually when you do have a claim, you see the value of have it. And also it's usually required to have it. So you see the value in that way too of just complying with the law. But in life insurance, it's interesting, right? Because you're paying your premiums consistently throughout the term. Unlike P&C, where you understand the value, right? Whether you go through a claims experience or is just legally required to have it so you understand the value, life insurance is very different. Life insurance, you may be paying your premium across the term and never actually see what that benefit is. And so I think one of the things here is thinking about how can you maintain customer advocacy in a product that is so low touch and value is harder to see, right? And so it becomes even more important for life insurance providers to engage the right ways with customers so that you can build promoters throughout the term. And so, one of the things that is interesting with life insurance, and even though it's such a low engagement, is that there's such a close connection and correlation between engagement and NPS. And so, one of the areas we see engagement, right, is on policy purchases. With COVID and the pandemic, right, there was sort of a rebirth of life insurance where there's a lot more people buying life insurance. People were, you know, probably a little bit more in tune with their health, want to make sure that they're protected, and being able to be there if there's any kind of unexpected event or a hardship that happens. And so we saw all suddenly life insurance providers see a huge influx in purchase. And with that, a positive correlation NPS. Every single life insurance provider, for the most part in our study, improved 15 to 20 points during that time, right? And that was simply because there is this more of this engagement, right? But now that we're seeing that settle down a bit, we're starting to return to kind of pre-pandemic levels of engagement and purchase, and then in parallel, we're seeing softening NPS that are back to those pre-pandemic levels.
Got it. So engagement is key. That is coming through loud and clear. So the question is, how then can providers engage with their customers, perhaps more proactively around their life insurance policy?
Yeah, absolutely. And to your point around engagement is key. It's absolutely key, right? So to reinforce that point, I think we see this in a couple ways in our data. Qualitatively, we see this in verbatims throughout. So life insurance detractors, the main verbatims that pop up to the top are things like, I only hear from my provider when I have to pay my bill, or I haven't heard from my advisor in years, or I haven't talked to anyone since I bought the policy. That can be, 20 plus years ago and you're not having any engagement. Versus when we look at promoter verbatims, they're always around the engagement with the company, right? So things like, my provider really seems to care about me. I know the name of my advisor and they call me every so often. So even kind of qualitatively, we see that connected very closely with NPS. But even more quantitatively, when we look at engagement in NPS, every time there's a increase in engagement, whether it be advice or purchase or even kind of getting help from their insurance provider, we see a bump in NPS. So those things are very closely correlated, right? And so right now, what we're seeing in the space is, even though engagement is really what's driving NPS, we're not seeing that happen very often, right? On average, only 21% of customers are reporting receiving any type of advice from their life insurance provider. And even fewer, only 8% are reporting some sort of help from the provider to improve health, right? That's a great way to engage with customers. Feels very natural. You can talk about, it can be more casual. And yet we're not seeing that happen very often, right? So if there's a way to promote engagement that feels like a more tailored and customized to the customer, right, rather than just transactional and paying a bill, will go very far in the space.
Wow. Okay. So given those numbers you were sharing, the 21%, any type of advice, 8% received help, sounds like there's lots of room for more advice conversations to be taking place between provider and customer. And like you said, it can have a huge payoff in terms of NPS. I know our data suggests that on average, relationship NPS scores are 24 points higher. So huge leap when customers engage in even just a single advice episode per year. And just to explore your point about it being a casual touch base, we do see that these don't need to be formal, sort of soup to nuts conversations, right? So, what types of topics do customers tend to appreciate engaging on?
Yeah, absolutely. This is a great point because advice, a lot of times with life insurance providers think about advice, they think about holistic advice, right? And then those conversations can be difficult to have frequently. But what we notice in our data is that, as you mentioned, even one single touch point throughout the year makes such an impact. So these things can range from, of course, financial planning and right coverage and those types of conversations, but they can be as simple as sharing resources for improving health or even just an annual check in call to understand any changing needs or how their lifestyle has changed, right? It doesn't have to be these meaty advice conversations, which interestingly, if we compare this to the wealth space, which has advisors as well, that part needs to be more meaty. We see that those conversations should have more of a advice type feel rather than a check-in. And that's what really drives NPS on that space. But in life, it's almost just making sure you're connecting with your customers regularly, and then you'll see the impacts come through in NPS.
That's really interesting. I think that makes a ton of sense and resonates with me that when you're having a human conversation, you're going to have more to go on in terms of how you evaluate your provider and feel a closer connection and feel more confidence that you have the right policy and you're well equipped with the knowledge that you need to be covered from a life insurance perspective. Makes sense why this is such an important piece of customer engagement and what the benefits are. But I guess from a more logistical standpoint, I can imagine that it's tough to make time for these conversations. Advisors are very busy, and there's only so many hours in a day. So, how can insurance providers help support or equip their workforce to have the time and the resources to have these valuable conversations more often?
Great question. So I think it comes down to a couple of things. I think one of the things is the digital capability, right? And what I mean by that is kind of twofold. One is, do you have the digital capabilities to potentially provide some of this advice digitally, right? It doesn't all have to be conversations, but as long as these digital communications feel tailored and customized to the customer, that can also serve as advice, right? It doesn't always have to be picking up the phone. The other piece, and to your point around there's only so many hours in a day, what can an advisor do? If you improve your digital capabilities so that customers can self serve more, that opens up time for advisors to spend time on things that are more valuable. So, for example, if they have a question on premium or what their coverage is, or they want to check their balance, all these things should be done easily and quickly digitally so a customer can self serve and do that, right? And so that way, agents and advisors aren't spending time answering those types of questions, and it frees up their time to have these more valuable conversations or even check-ins with customers more often.
Understood. So it's really about strategically pushing certain digital friendly experiences that way, whether it's website, mobile app, some combination of the two, not with the goal of avoiding their customers, but really with the goal of optimizing their interactions with customers to be more impactful types of conversations. That makes sense to me.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, great. This has been a great conversation. Really enjoyed chatting with you. Thanks so much for taking the time to chat with me. And I'm really excited to see how these insights evolve over the rest of 2023.
Yeah, me too. Great chatting with you, Sarah.